Right. And that's where I think it's really important to kind of tune in with ourselves, right? And what are our values about how we want to show up as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, but also how do we want to show up as a therapist, and then let that help guide what we're saying yes and no to. And like you said, there are certain things that really only we can do in the way that we want to. And then there's other things that we can hand off. And sometimes I think that I have been guilty of this, and other therapists are slow to hand off the things that we could hand off.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schuessler. Today, I'm talking to Sarah Leitschuh, a private practice entrepreneur in Eagan, Minnesota. Listen as we talk about how to be less overwhelmed in private practice. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Annie. I'm excited to be with you today.
Me too. So I want to talk to you about your entrepreneur. Let me try that again. I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey. And I also have a lot of questions about self-care.
Awesome.
So you've got a private practice, and you also founded Vibrant Therapist.
Yes.
So tell me why you started Vibrant Therapist and what it is.
Absolutely. And I think the Vibrant Therapist is really closely related to my personal experience in private practice. So like a lot of therapists, I started my career in an agency setting and worked in agency probably 7-8 years. And after the birth of my second child, I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. Primarily because we wanted to keep me at home with the kids so that I could kind of balance being the best, like the full-time mom, but also do a little bit of side stuff with my therapy practice. I started really, really small. So I started
and
at
so
one
Sarah,
day
were you partly thinking like, I wanna stay in the therapy world because I love it, but then also because staying in is really different than going all the way out and coming back in again?
Yeah, it was actually both of those things,
Yeah.
right? Because even when I was at the agency, I had cut back my hours to working part-time so that I could be home with my daughter at that time. And that felt like a good balance with one child where it made sense. I mean, I was still earning enough income to pay for her childcare, but once you add a second child into the mix, I loved being a therapist, but it didn't make sense to work part-time at that time because the childcare alone was going to cost more than what I was earning part-time in an agency setting, right? So there was that financial consideration, plus the piece that we wanted me to be able to be home with the kids more often than not. And then also, like you said, not wanting to totally step out the therapy field, it made sense to start with a small practice. And then it was really nice because as my kids grew, I was able to grow my practice at the same time.
Yeah.
And in trying to figure out how to balance that for myself, the family plus the part-time private practice and growing a private practice, then I started to realize how overwhelmed I was juggling that dual, like multiple responsibility kind of thing. And as a supervisor, I was hearing that from my supervisees too. So I started to think about, how do I do this work that I love as a therapist, but still have energy and time and passion for the things that I love outside of work as well. And that's where the Vibrant Therapist came from. Trying to figure that out for myself, but also thinking about how could I support other therapists who wanted to do the same thing. And not everyone, that I work with is juggling family plus a small private practice. Sometimes it's juggling multiple interests within your private practice or juggling multiple jobs, right? Private practice plus something else that you're doing. And we just kind of work on how do we do all of that and still love what we're doing and not feel so worn out and exhausted.
Yeah, I think being a therapist in private practice is unique in some ways because you really shouldn't be doing it if you're not loving it or at least feeling really fulfilled by it. Like it's not the kind of work that you can phone in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you've got to be really, I think right before we got on the phone, I used the word, or right before we started recording, I used the word jazzed, which I don't usually use, but it's, it's a bright morning. But you have to feel enthusiastic about being a therapist in order to be a good therapist and in order to keep getting the training that you need and the consultation. Right. So I think for us and for our clients, it's a particularly important thing to figure out how to stay in it enthusiastically for the long haul.
Absolutely. And I think that it's normal when we get started with private practice to feel overwhelmed and stressed out sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think it's about figuring out how do we navigate that so that it doesn't consume us and we lose that energy and that passion for the work that we love. Because I can see it happening sometimes where it's like you love the work, but you get so wrapped up in being stressed out about all the administrative behind the scenes stuff, learning that side of private practice, that then you start to not love the work as much as you used to.
And the part that I help therapists with is the building your practice part, running a business and, figuring that piece out. And then I know other people help with the behind the scenes documentation part of it.
Sure.
And you're really helping directly with the stress part. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I really try to work with therapists on taking a big picture look at what's going on for them in their practices and outside of their practices, and kind of assessing if they're feeling overwhelmed, where are they feeling overwhelmed and why are they feeling overwhelmed, so that we can kind of look at tackling the right areas in order to get them back to this place of being jazzed, like you said earlier.
Jazz hands. So what do you think for you, what do you think was particularly making it stressful? And then what helped it get less stressful?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. For me, in my personal experience, there was that learning curve of coming into private practice and the reality check of, oh no, there's a lot of stuff I don't know about private practice that I just didn't learn in agency setting, right? So there was that reality at the same time that I was all of a sudden a mom of 2 kids, right? I started my private practice when my son was, I think I was doing like the structural stuff when he was like 6 months old. So that was already a huge time of adjustment for me as a parent, coupled with, I'm going to start this private practice. And then also, I think what a lot of moms struggle with, and I think therapists in general, is that balancing of it's okay to take care of myself too, right? Like I can't be giving all of me to my clients plus my family and have nothing left for myself. So it was figuring out, how do I make time for myself as I'm trying to grow this practice and take care of little kids at the same time?
Yeah. And I know that you're really into how important it is to say no sometimes.
Absolutely. That is one of my big things, is really helping therapists figure out when and where they should say no, and helping them understand that saying no helps us eventually be able to say yes to the things that we really want to say yes to. A lot of times therapists, I find, struggle to say no because they worry about, hurting someone else's feelings, or they worry about the possibility that what they're saying no to is a great missed opportunity, even though in the back of their heads they know that that's not really the case. But I try to help therapists focus on what is it that you want to say yes to, and how does saying no now get you to that place.
So can you give me an example of like maybe a time that you've realized you had to say no?
So in my personal experience, a time that I really had to work on learning how to say no, for an example, would be public speaking events. When I first started my practice, I would go out and do talks for local moms groups, or even like community education would bring me in to do paid speaking engagements, where I'd be connecting with a lot of parents, which was a good starting spot for me, because at that time I was still working a lot with kids and families, and I was connecting with my target audience, right? And I was building my practice, so getting my name out there, building my recognition in the community where I was doing my private practice made a lot of sense. Yeah. But as my practice got bigger and my schedule got fuller, and also I started working on other things that I was interested in, like the Vibrant Therapist, I had to start saying no and picking and choosing the speaking opportunities that were a better fit for me, and letting go of the ones that weren't, because I found that I was showing up for speaking engagements that originally I thought were a good fit and I was excited about, but once I started working on it, I was like, I'm not really that excited about that, and that shows, right? I think I'm a good speaker and I can pull that off, but I still know that people could sense that in my energy, and then I was showing up not as the therapist I wanted to show up as in the community.
So kind of like, if it's not a hell yes, then it has to be a no.
Right. And I think what's really important is for therapists to be clear on where they're going and what their vision is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I talk to a lot of therapists who will say yes to any client that shows up, right?
Okay.
That will say yes to any opportunity that might potentially lead to
Mm-hmm.
clients. But really, I think we do have to slow down and think about, okay, what is our larger vision and how is this actually getting me to that vision, right? And some
Yeah.
speaking engagements or some clients that reach out to us are just not the right fit for where we're trying to go with our practice. And I think it's important to pay attention to that for the business side of it, right? Because we want to be aware of how we're showing up and how people are perceiving us as therapists and our practice, but also for us personally, the more that we're doing things that just don't feel right for us, the more drained and tired we are, and the more we're just getting irritated with our work, right? So it's twofold. We want to think about how is saying yes to the wrong things potentially hurting our business, but also
Mm-hmm.
how is it hurting us individually?
What else do you see? What do you see that something that maybe you used to do or something that you see therapists doing that they need to let go of, like bad habits?
A really bad habit that I have worked on and others that I work with are working on is not being able to accept help from others and not
Mm-hmm.
realizing when we need help from others. And when I talk about that, I talk about where can we use support within our private practice, but also where do we need more support outside of our work as well? Because I see a lot of therapists trying to do everything, right? Like they're trying to do their website, they're trying to do their own scheduling, they're trying to do everything for their family too, right? Like they're trying to be the super parent that shows up at every school event too. And it's like you're just running around constantly doing stuff for other people and trying to get your business going. But if you don't really know how to do some of that stuff, number one, I think you should hand it off to people who do know how to do it. But also that if we let other people help us, then we can show up with more energy and be like the best selves versions of ourselves when we are there.
Okay. I love that. And I think there's something about getting really clear on what can nobody but me do. So obviously sitting with clients
Right.
and doing face-to-face networking, for example. And then even at home, like if you're a parent, what is it that is really important? Maybe you can't make it to every school event, but what is it that's really important so that you're there for that? And
Right.
so like for me, I know it's having, this would be different for other parents, but for me, it's really having these particular kinds of conversations with my kids every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no one else who's going to be doing that. So if I
Right.
can preserve my energy and show up and tune into them at the end of the day, then that to me, that's my version of good parenting.
Right. Yep. Absolutely.
And for my partner, it might be more like playing with them at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day.
Right. And that's where I think it's really important to kind of tune in with ourselves, right? And what are our values about how
Mhm.
we want to show up as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, but also how do we want to show up as a therapist and then help let that help guide what we're saying yes and no to. And like you said,
Mhm.
there are certain things that really only we can do in the way that we want to. And then there's other things that we can hand off. And sometimes I think that I have been guilty of this and other therapists are slow to hand off the things that we could
Yeah.
hand off.
Yeah. One that I see is something that you've mentioned is the website piece.
Mm-hmm.
That because some people can really do their own websites and thrive at it, I think it makes therapists think that they have to do that.
Right.
And it's just not worth it for a lot of therapists.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, they're not going to come up with as good of a website. And they're also going to waste way too much time on it if it's not kind of within their superpowers.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah. So tell me more. Like what do you see as some systems or some hacks that you see therapists using that really help them with the time and energy sucks?
Absolutely. Well, I think I love that you brought up systems because I think that is ultimately the biggest kind of like hack per se that I try to help therapists with is looking at where they feel like their time is being sucked, where the work is draining them, and trying to figure out, okay, so why are we getting stuck there, and how can we make this aspect of your work for you and go more smoothly? Like, just for example, yesterday I just recorded a webinar about email systems, right? Because I had struggled myself with keeping up with my email inbox in 2017 and years before that, right? So in 2017, I figured out how to eliminate my backlog, create a system that helps me keep current every day and every week. And so I started telling people, this is an example. Like, if you're struggling with emails, make a system. This is how I did it. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, whoa, Sarah, we want to hear what your system was. And I was like, oh, whoa, that wasn't even on my radar that like everyone else was struggling with that too. So I went ahead and created this webinar about that topic. And literally, like, my stress level is so much less now that I have a system that works there, right? And not everyone's going to be stressed out about email, but wherever you feel stressed out, you can take a close look at it and try to figure out, how could I make this work better for me?
What was one thing in the webinar about like how to make email easier?
Well, the first thing that I really worked on with the attendees was we have to get rid of the backlog, because even if we start working on keeping up with our day-to-day emails, having that old stuff hanging over us just creates anxiety. So I kind of proposed a twofold approach, like work on eliminating your backlog, and you really have to make a commitment and dedicate chunks of time to get rid of that backlog. So that was, I think, the biggest pieces, right? Like, dedicate the time, block it off on your schedule. We always can think that we're going to do something, but if we have it on our schedule, I think we're 99% more likely to follow through with that action. And then the second piece was really, how do we find a system that works for you in keeping up with the ongoing emails? So I talked a lot about giving yourself permission to delete things that you don't actually need, unsubscribing from emails that aren't offering value to your practice, and how to effectively use folders to manage tasks that can be batched more on a weekly basis, and then how to use folders effectively to archive information that you may need to go back to get later, but really using your inbox more as this is a list of things I actually need to follow up on versus a holding space for every email you've ever received.
Yes, good.
So sorry, that was way more than just one thing.
No, I want more. I love it. And I think it does stress just about everybody out. I find for me, and I'm curious if this is true for you or for the therapist you work with, blocking out a particular time when I'm checking my email and I'm getting to like email 0, which I don't get to every day, but I get to a lot of times. Blocking out that time rather than just kind of thinking of email as something I'm going to check like 20 times a day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that really helps me.
Right. Well, and when I think about systems as being the details of when we do something, how we do it, and why we do it in that way, right? And I think for you, Annie, like what you're describing with having set times of the day just helps alleviate that unknown of when am I going to get to all of these emails, right? It's like, if I have this dedicated time in my schedule that I know I do my emails every day, you don't even have to worry about it. You can think about all the other things that you want to be focusing on and save the emails for that dedicated time.
Yeah. And it's true that sometimes I look anyway and I'll check my email when it's not email checking time.
Right.
But at least I know like this isn't the most effective use of my time. So I can, get off of there more quickly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I do that too, right? Like I check my emails throughout the day, but I give myself permission to only respond to them at certain times of the day, unless it is something super urgent.
Yeah. Do you ever use, so I use, I know we're getting into the like nitty gritty, but
Sure.
I think that can be so useful. Do you ever use Boomerang?
I don't use Boomerang. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So it's this app where you can set up emails to go out at particular times. Like, let's say if you're checking email on the weekends, you can decide, I want to write back to this person and just get it out of my box, but I don't want to have the reputation of being someone who answers emails like at night or on weekends. And so you can just set it to go off like Monday at 9. Yeah. So I found that really helpful to kind of show people my own email habits.
Got it. Yeah. No, and I think that's a really great boundary, like that you don't want to let people know that you're available all the time. That
Yeah.
was something that came up in the webinar yesterday was someone asked that question about like, what do you do about clients who expect you to respond to them right away? And I had said, it really is about us setting the tone and letting our clients know what our boundaries are around emails and how accessible we are outside of session and what type of information is okay to share through email. And if it's really that urgent, should they be calling you instead of emailing you? And I think some of that stuff we can set the tone for and communicate clearly with our clients and then reduce our stress because we've had those conversations up front.
Yeah. My colleague who you may know, Rebecca Wong, has this, when you send her an email, you get back an email right away. And one thing that it says is, if this is of a clinical nature, I'm not going to write back to it. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how she words it.
Yep.
She's, very compassionate in her wording, but I'm not going to get back to you through email, but I am going to make note of this and we'll talk about it in our session.
Nice.
Yeah. And I just thought that's so lovely because it's clear and it's holding a boundary that probably, gets talked about in the session as well.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I love that too. I started using an automatic out of office response every weekend now.
Oh, good.
Because I don't see clients on Fridays and Mondays. So I have a pretty long weekend. And during the summer, especially, I wanted to not be thinking about, are people expecting me to be responding to them when I was spending time with my kids? So I had started doing it in the summer, and I was thinking of stopping in the fall, and then I was like, why? Like, you don't work. You don't see clients on Friday, and I do like a little bit of administrative stuff, but why would you not keep going if it's working for you? And it really helps me like hold that boundary so that I can take the time for myself and my family that I want to, but also it is modeling for the clients a healthy boundary, right? And now my clients will send me an email and say, but I don't expect you to respond until Tuesday, or we'll talk about this when we have our session on Tuesday. And I love that.
Yeah, they know what to expect.
Right.
So can I ask you, I always ask everybody this because it's a very popular question for people to get to hear the answer to. What do you charge in your private practice?
My private practice rate is $120 per hour for individuals, and then $135 for couples or families.
And how do you feel about your fee and how it kind of fits into all of this stuff about self-care?
I feel okay about my fee. Like I think that's part of the journey of being in private practice is getting comfortable with your fee, especially coming out of agency work where everyone's on insurance and a lot of our clients were really low incomes. And now in my private practice, it's a different population. So it took me a little bit of a while to get adjusted to that. But in terms of like, how does it fit with self-care? I do think that it is important for therapists to have a fee that allows them to set their schedule in a way that they don't have to see so many clients that they get burnt out. And I think that's different for each of us individually. And it's also different geographically in terms of the types of clients that we serve.
Yeah. And what do you mean by geographically?
Like, I just know that kind of like what certain, and even like in Minnesota in the Twin Cities area versus the rural up north area, what people are willing and able to pay is a little bit different. So I think we have to take that into consideration when we're setting our fees as well.
Absolutely. And like what that also always relates to what kind of rent we're paying and all of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And the cost of living is different, right? For therapists, you see this question come up all the time, some of the therapist communities online, and the range of prices that people are charging is huge. And I think it makes sense because our expenses are different. We're all practicing all over the country and the world in some of those groups.
Right. And if we were to name, this might be a good habit for us to start doing, for us to name the rent we pay along with the rate that we're charging, we would see probably kind of a tendency that the places with the higher rent are going to have the higher fees as well. Because it doesn't translate. Like I'm in San Francisco. So like 120, 130 is different in San Francisco than it is in Egan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
And I mean, I'm a big fan of charging what you're worth though too, and like really standing by that. As I kind of started working on the Vibrant Therapist, I did get some comments from other therapists in Minnesota about my coaching rate being maybe higher than what they would want to pay. And we had a conversation about that, as therapists, we're not always, others don't always value our worth. And I'm not going to kind of continue that in my coaching, right? Like if I think I'm worth a certain amount of money, that's what I'm going to charge. If you don't want to pay that, then that's your choice ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And I've been reframing lately this idea of like what the outcomes are worth.
Yeah.
And so I think if someone is looking for help with getting more balance in their lives and setting up systems and having some, having a life that feels more sustainable as a therapist, I think it's going to be really important that they're investing in themselves too.
Right.
I'm curious if you're comfortable sharing, what is your rate as a coach?
My coaching rate is $150, which so it's higher than my therapy rate, but still I know lower than a lot of coaches in the country.
Yeah.
So I feel comfortable with the rate that I'm at. And I do agree with you, right? Like I feel like in coaching, a lot of times you're making a short-term investment that
That's
really
right.
can have a major long-term lasting impact on your career as a therapist in private practice. So to me, it seems more than fair.
And if you could time travel way back to the start of your private practice, what would you tell the Sarah of that time?
Gosh, what would I tell the Sarah of that time? It's interesting because I think, I definitely made missteps along the way. And I don't know that I would want to erase those because I think they were all learning opportunities and they offer me a lot now that I can offer to my supervisees and my coaching clients. So I wouldn't tell myself not to do anything, but I think I would tell myself to breathe, to trust the process, to give myself time and space to grow into being a private practice clinician and to know that I would get there. I'm the type of person who kind of likes to know what to do and do the right thing all the time, but I think that I really needed that opportunity to just learn as I go in private practice.
Great. Sarah, what's the best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you?
Well, I would love that. I am at sarahleitschuh.com. So SarahLeitschuh.com. That's where you can find all things related to the Vibrant Therapist, and the supports that I have for therapists are there. And I also have a Facebook group, or not group, but page for the Vibrant Therapist as well. So love to connect with people there as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's such a pleasure to get to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you for having me, Annie. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for listening. Did you know we have a lot of free trainings for you? Head over to coachingwithannie.com and click on free trainings about how to set your fees, write a killer About Me page, network effectively, and more. All right, I'll see you next week. This is me trying to have it all, trying to be the good dog mother and podcast interviewer. Okay.